I'm very happy to announce that we're also building AI for Taiwan. And so today we're announcing that Foxconn, Taiwan, the Taiwanese government, NVIDIA, TSMC, we're going to build the first giant AI supercomputer here for the AI infrastructure and the AI ecosystem of Taiwan.
That's NVIDIA's Jensen Huang talking about the company's AI supercomputer plans during his keynote in Taiwan overnight. Just one of many AI-related announcements made by the chip giant at that event. They say Jensanity's back. Jim, that's the headline this morning.
Yeah, oh, look, it's a great and enjoyable keynote. If you want to find out why everyone loves him, you can get it all in that because he's talking about how, look, I want people to buy some of us. They don't have to buy all of us, which therefore has made him, he's making some available to companies that don't use his stuff in the data, well, in the cloud. So I thought it was very, very positive. I mean, look, he has a string of companies. And once again, if you wanted to buy what's most impacted, it would be Dell. I thought Marvell was mentioned very positively. Cisco was mentioned. These are companies that can link it to other companies that may not right now be using him. But I think overall what he's saying is, look, this isn't a revolution. It's an information management revolution. We've never seen anything like it. David, he talks about how there was electricity was the first, okay?
Yes.
And then the internet, and
yes.
Now this. And he's the leader of this. And I don't know. I felt comfortable. Obviously, people bid it up thinking there was going to be some sort of announcement, which was major countries. We didn't get that. I would have liked Singapore, for instance.
When you say major countries, what do you mean?
Well, yeah, we still have that.
Wouldn't that rely on the Trump administration, too?
Yes, but the Trump administration wasn't there.
Right. So why would there have been an expectation that there would have been an announcement like that if it would be more of an administration announcement than a Jensen Huang announcement?
True, but I know that there are big countries over there that want to have sovereign AI, but I guess they didn't feel they had the permission to get it yet. Remember, everything was led by.
But we know we're waiting for those new rules.
Yes.
So that's what we're waiting for. That is not going to be announced by Jensen Huang. That will be announced by Secretary Lutnick or, in that.
But the sovereign AI was very significant, and the stock moved up greatly on that.
Yeah, well, I think on the deals from last week in Saudi Arabia and what they're doing, to your point on sovereign AI and some of the other countries in the region as well.
I just thought overall this was not a speech about how we've got to change the rules. It was more of a speech of we got a lot of things going. Was it breakthrough? I mean, I was listening to it. Man, it was on from 11 to 1:15. I shifted it and did it at 3:30 after checking in with his people. That's still, David,
this
the Twilight Zone era.
This is a company that will be generating enormous amounts of free cash flow, right?
So they're putting up something.
And so they can make all sorts of investments. It's not as though you're just static. They can continue to invest in what's coming next and continue to beat out their potential competitors as a result.
Well, he talked about DeepSeek and what a great partner they can be. And I thought that was really interesting because he's saying, listen, we work with DeepSeek all the time. They work with everybody. And I think, once again, you come back and you say, dominant player in this year, Carl. Dominant player.
Yeah, Oppenheimer, top pick today, 175 target. We'll talk more about it.
Yeah, I mean, it goes down. It was up big last week. It's had up 16% since the low. But there wasn't anything there which says raising numbers. There just wasn't.
NVIDIA just turning higher after opening in the red. CEO Jensen Huang speaking overnight at an AI conference in Taiwan, where he was welcomed by a large score of fans and reporters with what some are now calling Jensanity. Christina Partsinevelos has been tracking the action. Christina, what's the latest?
Well, the latest is he's not signing women's shirts, but he's definitely signing some hats. But NVIDIA is changing its data center approach by opening its platform to chip rivals. That was the biggest NVIDIA announcement at Computex. It's called NVLink Fusion, allowing customers to integrate their own CPUs or AI chips into NVIDIA's ecosystem for the first time. Marvell, MediaTek, Qualcomm were some of the partners listed. Competitor Broadcom, notably missing. Tech giants, though, can pair their custom silicon with NVIDIA's technology, potentially unlocking significant revenue growth as more data centers would adopt NVIDIA's server platform. platform. So it's really about owning the entire stack. But Wedbush analyst Matt Bryson wonders if it's really going to grow market share because of limited demand for these third-party CPUs from Qualcomm, for example, and that hyperscalers would just prefer to use their internal networking products. But it's also why Qualcomm CEO told CNBC London this morning that the company will soon launch a new data center CPU specifically designed to connect with NVIDIA's GPUs and software, though the exact timeline remains unchanged. So big news coming from Qualcomm. Going back to NVIDIA, though, they also unveiled plans to partner with Foxconn on a massive AI factory supercomputer in Taiwan powered by 10,000 Blackwell GPUs, with TSMC leveraging the system for research and development, as well as creating a second headquarter in Taiwan to provide proximity to key partners as well as employee talent. But NVIDIA shares were up, 16% last week, and Jordan Klein at Mizuho says a lot of momentum chasers came in pretty hard for Jensen last week, and many were also expecting a new NVIDIA AI PC chip as well, so it could be why you saw shares open negative this morning and really just trending flat right now, David.
Yeah, Christine, although to your point, they are now flat. So they are up on the session, at least less than an hour in. Christina, thank you. Let's get the Street's take. Bernstein analyst Stacy Rasgon joins us. He's got a buy rating, 185 price target on the stock. Were you in some way, Stacy, at all disappointed in terms of the announcements we got out of Taiwan from Jensen?
No, I thought they were pretty positive. I mean, like Jensanity, I guess, is a very funny. I think that's a good a view of how he's perceived over there. I thought the announcements were good. I think to Christina's point, the NVLink Fusion announcement was, to me, the most surprising. They are opening up the ecosystem to other partners, which I think is good. I thought, to her point, also like the missing folks were also very interesting. Intel and AMD and Broadcom. They have a competing interconnect. There's an open standard called UA-Link that they've been trying to develop. You've got like the second tier ASIC players that are part of NVIDIA's thing. I mean, maybe trying to like boost them versus some of the leaders like Broadcom. I thought overall, look, he said that the GB200, like the current products are in full production. GB300 is well on its way. That's coming very soon. Bunch of other product announcements. Everything. I thought it was good. And again, the stock is. It's one day, but the stock is outperforming in a down tape today. Like, I thought it was good.
Yeah, and as Christina just said, obviously, very strong week last week. The diffusion rules are gone. Is that the last overhang, though, in terms of at least what's going to replace them and whether it still will put up some barriers to their ability to sell?
Yeah, so the diffusion rules are gone. So that does remove a near-term headwind. Because remember, they report on the 28th. If the rules went in place like on the 15th as they were supposed to, they would have had to guide with them in place, and that may have caused some issues. It does look like, there was some talk about Trump replacing them with like individually negotiated bilateral agreements, and that does seem to be maybe where we're going, especially with all the announcements out of the Middle East last week. That could be good or bad. I think at least in the near term, as long as you don't have to sign them, to enable NVIDIA to sell, like, I think it's okay. But ultimately, it may take time, to negotiate 120 like distinct, bilateral agreements. Personally, I also don't like the idea of tying this stuff to the trade deals, which would seem to be where they're going. But there was at least the deals that they signed with Saudi Arabia and the UAE last week were actually quite positive. They were very big. And if we start to see similar deals, elsewhere, I think this can be good. At a minimum, it doesn't look like you're going to be constrained in the near term in terms of what they can sell to the majority of the world. And I think that's a good thing. That was a big worry when we were concerned that the diffusion rules actually would get put into place.
Yeah. I mean, given the free cash flow generation, just the size of this company and its ability to sort of outpace its rivals in terms of financials, what are your expectations for moving into new areas that perhaps, and or new products beyond, obviously, the core?
Yeah, I mean, look, so NVIDIA's and Jensen in particular have been very good at thinking not just like one quarter ahead. I mean, he's thinking 10 years out, right? And it's very clear that all the success that they're having today is the result of some of the decisions that they've made over the last 5 years, 10 years, even longer. And I don't see any reason for that to change, right? We've seen him build all of the different and build up all the different pieces that he needs to sell these AI factories, these AI data centers. He's moving into other end markets. I think he mentioned PCs a little early. We didn't see another specific AI PC announced, but we did see, they've got this, I can't even remember, it's the DGX Spark or the little workstation that they're selling. So it's sort of a PC form factor. They're moving into there. They're pushing much harder into networking. And now with this, again, with this Fusion announcement, they're extending the ecosystem out above and beyond what they're just doing on their own. He's not constrained by short-term decisions. Like, this is a company that has both the leadership as well as the resources to continue pushing the envelope and kind of moving the goalpost and making it very difficult for competitors to catch them. I don't see that.
I do think it's interesting, Stacy, speaking of competitors, though, with the announcement about the NVLink Fusion, of course, that other companies could sort of link into this infrastructure. I mean, what are the opportunities that Jensen has just opened for potentially competitors here, too?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. Look, I figure if like, for example, if hyperscalers are going to do ASICs, they're going to do ASICs anyways. Like, you might as well have some of that rather than none. And I think to the extent that you can be extending pieces of your ecosystem into that space, I think that's good. Again, if you go back to what I said earlier, like, if you look at the ASIC partners that have announced, it was players like Marvell and MediaTek. So it's more the second tier guys that are looking to take share. So if he's enabling them to take share and getting a piece of that, I think that's fine. I think it's also interesting, you talked about Qualcomm. So Qualcomm made the announcement with Saudi Arabia last week that they're going to be building AI data centers with them, and they're going to have CPUs. And as of last week, it was a little unclear how their CPUs were going to fit into the broader AI ecosystems they're building up. And now it's a little clearer, right? You can kind of see how they'll fit in with the NVIDIA GPUs that those guys will presumably be building for those data centers as well. So to the extent that Qualcomm was not playing, that there are the opportunities now for other CPU vendors like them to start to benefit from these build-outs as well.
Morgan Stanley analyst Joseph Moore. NVIDIA is his top pick in semis with an overweight rating and price target of 160. Joseph, thanks for joining us. Any big surprises out of this announcement for you? Is it sort of this new integration option that they're announcing, or the supercomputer? What'd you like? How does it play into your overall thesis for NVIDIA?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger picture, I wouldn't call it a surprise, but this big focus on this so-called AI factory, right? We're seeing very strong demand for token growth. Jensen made the point that bigger hyperscalers are now talking about token numbers on their earnings call. It's becoming a driving factor for their business, and they need a lot of hardware to manage that. Obviously, geopolitics plays a big factor here, and so having capacity in each region. You alluded to the announcement in Saudi Arabia last week, Taiwan this week. Just a lot of focus on putting this capacity everywhere in the world, and just facing with a very strong degree of demand for AI inference at this moment.
Have we moved past maybe the biggest worries about DeepSeek and how that may affect demand for these chips and all the company services that are being offered by a name like NVIDIA? Is that sort of in the past? Was it just a shock? But we're through that. We realize the innovation is still largely here and important.
I think we've moved past it to some degree. We have new innovations every week. We've had everyone who spends money on hardware sort of articulating that it's important to keep doing so, to keep scaling these training clusters. And now, to me, it's quite important that the demand surge that we're seeing now is more on the inference side. It's actually the usage of these models. It's not based on some venture-backed investment in big training clusters. It's actually usage. It's the revenue-generating part of the business that's now driving hardware sales, and I think that's an important thing. DeepSeek shows that China will be competitive in this market. I think that will continue to be the case. And I think that we've seen that people are going to make do with different amounts of hardware in different regions, but we've, importantly, really see the value of high-end hardware everywhere in the world, and I think that will continue to be the case. So I think the big moment where people were really concerned about it has passed. The trade tensions around China, things like that, have persisted, so we still have to deal with that. And NVIDIA's quarter, they will face some export controls in China, so that'll be a factor. But I think we've moved past the concern that this was going to be a shift in the overall AI spending environment.
Joe, remind me, where are we right now in the level of concern about their margins in the back half of this year going into next year? That was sort of the locus of some concern a few months back, right?
Yeah, 100%. And, they're still working hard on these rack scale systems, right? And Jensen said in the keynote, this was a lot harder than they expected. Bringing up these large scale racks is something that took them longer than they thought. They had to work hard at it. It's had some margin ramifications, I think. They also, have to write down some of this China product. So I think we're probably still dealing with some potential for margin pressures, but it looks transitory to me. And they've, said we do plan on seeing gross margins getting back into the mid-70s. A lot of this was just the startup on moving from selling cards into selling entire racks and the challenges that come with that. And so I don't think we're necessarily completely out of the woods, but I don't think it's something we'll be talking about in 6 months. So I feel, quite good about the stock, particularly as we move into the second half.
With this announcement about the NVLink Fusion, I was just curious, and we had asked someone previously, about what it means potentially for competitors, to be more collaborators. Does that open up sort of any stock interest in other names in your coverage area?
Well, I think we're going to have to see what it means. I think, they are actively supporting their competition potentially with this NVLink technology.
Right.
And so, you may see ASIC vendors can get better because of what they're doing here. At the same time, it's a source of revenue for NVIDIA. I think it gives them probably some openness. Their customers are very large hyperscalers that, have a lot of market power. And I think probably helping them do what they'd want to do is probably a good thing. So I have a lot of faith in their ability to manage through it. But in terms of parsing out who wins and who loses, I think we probably need a little bit more time. But this is a vibrant ecosystem. I think there's room for a lot of companies to grow. And so, I don't necessarily think it's zero sum. And it is interesting. It's a little bit of an unexpected direction for them to take. But I think we need some time to assess how it's going to affect the ecosystems.
Everybody here owns NVIDIA. Snipe, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of this news? What do you make of the chip trade right now after a huge week last week? Some deals in Saudi Arabia and over in the Middle East. And then we see Jensen Huang do a keynote talking about investing in Taiwan and also some pretty notable partnerships with Foxconn and also Taiwan Semi.
Yeah, no, I think as it relates to even last week, the momentum with obviously what happened with the Middle East and all the investments there. And I just think about the AI factory build. Again, he mentioned this a couple of weeks ago in terms of what the CapEx potentially will be, $1 trillion over the next few years. So again, I say this a lot, but they are absolutely in the beltway, for all the CapEx building and the need and demand for their chips. So it's interesting to see this kind of open source model now where other players are allowed to kind of participate and work with them. I think that'll actually continue. We'll see continued momentum and upside for NVIDIA as a result of some of these partnership deals. So I like this. I like this opportunity for them.
All right. Weiss, by the way, Joe, I'm going to get to you in a second. Weiss, by the way, some of the momentum for NVIDIA has been the White House saying they're going to ease those export controls on shipping chips to China. At the same time, we see Jensen Huang making investments in Taiwan. Now, during the trip to the Middle East, the president essentially slapped Tim Cook's hand for not being there. Jensen Huang was there with him, and then he left and announced an investment in Taiwan, where this administration is trying very hard to move chip production from. Any concerns about that when it comes to the stock, regulation, anything else when it comes to NVIDIA?
No, none. I think that they're also going to make investments in creating chips just for China that will be passable for the U.S. government. So NVIDIA is doing exactly what they should be doing. They're hedging their bets away from the U.S., which, by the way, is what our trading partners are doing. So the downside of that, I think, is obvious in terms of the U.S. But to me, the big issues with NVIDIA, or it's not a big issue, where I get uncomfortable is as it reaches the old high. Because things couldn't be better at that point in time than when they reached the old high, roughly around 150. So for me, it's a decent-sized trading position. I'm most likely to get out before earnings. For no other reason, I've got enough tech exposure, and why take the risk in something I'm not committed to.
18,000 chips going to Abu Dhabi data center, the Middle East last week, really highlighting demand is coming from other places around the world. This is a man who's leading this company, who is speaking with a lot of confidence in the last several days ahead of next week's earnings report. I think a lot of positive momentum has been restored once again in NVIDIA and in the entire semiconductor industry itself. And I also think we mentioned at the top of the show, always look at positioning. You're now rebuilding positioning in semis. A lot of people move to the sidelines in semis. You're rebuilding semis. I would be very surprised that after next week, we weren't talking about NVIDIA with a stock price that's higher than where it is today.
I think the important thing to take away from that is Jensen Huang doesn't seem to have any concerns about the threat from China to either do a massive blockade around Taiwan or to take over Taiwan in 2027.
And he doesn't care about the bond market either.
Apparently
NVIDIA shares down about 0.25%. We're going to move on. We're going to get to
Well, Microsoft and NVIDIA, speaking of, are big tech's first movers in this current era of AI. Both are making moves this week that investors can dissect to better understand their strategies to stay ahead. The bottom line, they're both adding tools to knit their offerings into the essential fabric of AI's expansion. Microsoft today kicking off Build in Seattle, its annual conference focused on hardcore developers. The biggest news for investors, I think, in Microsoft is embracing Model Context Protocol. It's a way for third-party AI agents to take the wheel and steer Windows or other apps. And meanwhile, over the weekend at Computex, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang unveiled NVLink Fusion, a way for other chip makers to hitch their custom CPU chips to NVIDIA's AI specialist GPUs. Qualcomm, Marvell, Synopsys among the early partners there. If it works, the tools might serve as a strategic moat, similar to what the App Store did for Apple's iPhone. It was just easier to build and sell games on iOS through the App Store, so developers offered their best products there, which fueled iPhone demand. We'll have to see if it works for Microsoft and NVIDIA in AI.
We have some very important things to talk about from Jensen's keynote last night because he inadvertently gave us some clues about what we could expect from NVIDIA's earnings on May 28th. Jensen said something extremely important. Grace Blackwell is in full production. This means we could see NVIDIA's gross margin move higher sooner than what we were told to expect on NVIDIA's last earnings call. NVIDIA CFO told us on the company's last earnings call that margins would drop into the low 70s in Q1 because they would spend money to expedite the manufacturing of Blackwell, and then margins would return to the mid-70s in the second half of this year after Blackwell has ramped. Jensen told us that Grace Blackwell is in full production, so it sounds like they're ahead of schedule. If this is correct, then we could see higher margins included in NVIDIA's next quarter guidance, and that would be massively positive for the stock. I've said repeatedly in recent videos that I'm expecting margins and margin guidance to be a major focus for market participants on this specific earnings report. And if Grace Blackwell is in full production like Jensen said, then that means we could see higher margin guidance on this earnings report, and that is a big deal. On the topic of Blackwell's production ramp, Beth Kindig posted on X this weekend saying that Morgan Stanley estimates NVIDIA shipped 1,500 Blackwell racks in April, which is substantially more than the 1,000 racks they shipped in all of Q1. I assume they're talking about calendar Q1 because the month of April is part of NVIDIA's fiscal Q1. But regardless of that, the point is that Blackwell production is ramping very quickly. This lines up with what we saw from TSMC's April revenue report, in which they reported revenue growth of 22.2% over the previous month. That is massive growth for a single month. We were wondering how much of that surge in revenue was due to pull forward ahead of tariffs, and how much of it was NVIDIA stepping in to expedite manufacturing. And now with Jensen saying that Grace Blackwell is in full production in Morgan Stanley's delivery estimates, I think this surge in TSMC's revenue may be largely due to Blackwell ramping faster than what we were expecting, and that is very exciting. All right, so what are my thoughts as we head into earnings? Originally, I was very bullish on this earnings report as I expect Blackwell earnings to show up in a substantial way. Then we got news of the $5.5 billion charge due to the H20 restriction in China, and I became concerned about this earnings report. Then I realized that if NVIDIA stopped selling the H20, that would actually be positive for NVIDIA's gross margin, which led me to have a neutral view on this specific earnings report. And now I'm happy to say that I'm cautiously optimistic heading into NVIDIA's May 28th earnings report. Grace Blackwell is in full production sooner than what we expected, which means we should see margins return to the mid-70s sooner than expected, and that is a massive positive. The one question mark that is causing me to be slightly cautious about this earnings report is the situation with China. We know that NVIDIA sales to the Middle East countries will help offset a lot of what they're missing out on from China, but the sales to the Middle East countries are for NVIDIA's Blackwell Ultra, and Blackwell Ultra has not launched yet. Jensen told us last night that Blackwell Ultra will launch in Q3 of this year. That means those shipments to the Middle East will likely not start until August, because August is the first full month of NVIDIA's fiscal third quarter. That means that we could see a very short-term revenue air pocket as NVIDIA is barred from selling to China, and we are at the same time waiting for Middle East sales to begin when Blackwell Ultra launches in August. So that does concern me a little bit in the immediate short term when it comes to NVIDIA's next quarter revenue guidance. China represented 13% of NVIDIA's revenue before the H20 restriction. And now the question is what will fill that gap before Middle East shipments begin. And so all things considered, I am cautiously optimistic about this earnings report on the 28th. Lastly, I want to mention a massive announcement that Jensen made last night, and that is the reveal deal of NVLink Fusion. NVLink Fusion allows NVIDIA's clients to integrate chips from other companies into their systems. TPUs from Google, CPUs from Qualcomm, custom ASICs, etc. This is a massive deal because it throws the bearish argument of NVIDIA's moat being breached completely out the window. Think about what NVIDIA has done here. They have cemented themselves as the leader in AI infrastructure by developing entire systems, and the chip is only one part of the system. And so now, if another company develops a better chip, that's great, but they're still going to rely heavily on NVIDIA for the holistic system, and therefore they're much more likely to remain in NVIDIA's ecosystem, even if they develop their own accelerators. This is a game changer. All things considered, I am very optimistic about the long-term future of NVIDIA, and even more so after all that we heard from Jensen last night. Demand is still extremely strong based on what we heard from all of the hyperscalers' earnings calls, as well as other companies like OpenAI, xAI, Perplexity, and others. NVIDIA maintains their competitive moat and holistic ecosystem, and companies still get performance increases that are so substantial that they have no choice but to buy NVIDIA's latest products in large quantities. All things considered, I genuinely think NVIDIA's brightest days are ahead. At least that's my view of the situation. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective, and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.